Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing with the tafsir. And yesterday, let's just really quick go over what we did yesterday. And we talked about, let's see, this ayah right here. We talked about ولا تأكلوا مما لم يذكر اسم الله عليه وإنه لفسق وإن الشياطين ليوحون إلى أوليائهم ليجادلوكم وإن أطعتموهم إنكم لمشركون أو من كان ميتا فأحييناه وجعلنا له نورا يمشي به في الناس كمن مثله في الظلمات ليس بخارج منها. So a couple of things that we talked about last time. We talked about the epistemology yesterday. And that what we meant by epistemology, we said we've got the resource of knowledge, we've got the data, and we also have the interpretation. But then you could see that when it came to this ayah right there, أَوَمَنْ كَانَ مَيْتًا, is a person that is dead, similar to a person that had been brought to life. فَأَحْيَيْنَا, and we had given them نُورًا يَمْشِي بِهِ. So then we said a couple things. We said that the scholars that interpreted this one as a literal interpretation, they said this is basically talking about the chronology of life. So we're talking about a person that didn't exist before, Maita, and then they were given life, in other words, brought to life, whether believer, non-believer, etc. And then they were given Nura Yamshi Bihi. So that was the first interpretation. They were given the guidance to basically walk amongst people. Okay. And is that person similar to a person that was dead and then they were brought to life, but they're living their life in darknesses upon darknesses, and they cannot exit out of it. So that was the first interpretation. The second interpretation interpreted based on a metaphorical interpretation and said that this is talking about something or a person that would be dead once they are not basically recognizing the religion, and that they would metaphorically be as a dead person who's not capable of recognizing truth, who's not recognizing the purpose of their life. Are they equal to a person that recognizes the purpose of life? Let's say, so a person that was metaphorically dead is basically a person that is not finding the purpose of their life, not recognizing the purpose that preceded their existence, and it's not a made-up purpose. Okay, and a person that received the revelation is a person that basically received life. Okay, that they recognize life, they recognize their purpose, they recognize the meaning of their life, then therefore they would be alive, full of light, full of spirit, full of potential. وَجَعَلْنَا لَهُ نُورًا يَمْشِي بِهِ. So this would be, they're full of potential and full of light in their aqidah, in their creed, in their understanding of life, in their understanding of God, in their understanding of themselves, in their understanding of their purpose, which is al-akhirah. And in terms of practice, جَعَلْنَا لَهُ نُورًا يَمْشِي بِهِ. In terms of practice, they basically have the light that they would walk based on, metaphorically, that they would consider as their place of guidance to help them walk the walk in discipline. So we would then, in that situation, with that interpretation, أحييناه, to mean basically had aqidah in place, جعلنا له نورا يمشي به would basically be the sharia in place. In other words, آمنوا عملوا الصالحات. Amanu would be the foundation of faith that brought their recognition of life, recognition of their purpose, recognition of Allah, and جعلنا له نورا يمشي به. We're talking about a certain discipline / عملوا الصالحات. Okay. The other to continue with this interpretation, then with the inference, that is, if a person is dead and therefore does not have the foundation of understanding of life, and then therefore they would be living in darkness in their vision, in their understanding of life, in their understanding of their hereafter, in their understanding of their existence, in their understanding of their purpose, then therefore, ظُلُمَاتٍ لَيْسَ بِخَارِجٍ مِنْهَا. If they don't understand the reason for their existence, and they consider themselves as nothing but matter in motion, or they consider themselves as basically having the wrong foundation in their understanding, then in that situation, the implication is going to be no nur, but darkness. It would be darkness upon darkness, and therefore not guidance in their vision, and understanding of life, and no guidance in what path and what paradigm they should be living based on. And therefore they would start falling either sometimes with speculation / dhann, or they would take their own intuition, which would actually be inspired by shaitan, and certainly fueled with lots of hawa, fueled with lots of desire. Then in that situation, they would be in darkness upon darkness and end up really never exiting from that darkness. And that's basically how the disbelievers find a narrative to comfort them, when in reality, they are just living in fake comfort. And they recognize that, so they start seeking different ways of trying to find either comfort by letting their major celebrities think of them as the area of comfort, the area of support, the area that they would give them the inspiration to confidence, but then they recognize that they would only be plotting in their own favor, in other words, in their own interest, and not for the other people's interests. So this ayah then continues, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا فِي كُلِّ قَرْيَةٍ أَكَابِرَ مُجْرِمِيهَا. Every single city, this isn't speaking about a specific city, but this is talking about every group of people. There would be these considered figures, okay, whether we're speaking about politicians, celebrities, whatever, these mujrimin, akabir, that people would take as their leaders, people would take as their inspirers, people would take as their influencers, and then they would liyamkuru fiha. Why liyamkuru fiha? Liyamkuru actually means to plot, to create an agenda. But this agenda, they would think that it is in order to bring into their favor. So we talked about that yesterday, and we said whether you want to call it Illuminati, you want to call it Freemasonry, whatever you want to call it, at the end, certainly whatever group, right now like never before, Gaza has exposed a lot of what was actually happening behind the scenes in controlling the masses, not necessarily in favor of human rights or in favor of humanity or in favor of justice, but it was always in favor of their own interests. So now they had an interest, and that interest is to basically create some kind of Rivera, some kind of an area to basically be on the shores and basically on Gaza land. And they also had discovered that there was a lot of natural gas there. So even if it meant eliminating and committing genocides in Gaza, if it means getting to that money, all the money is basically, and any money is definitely, according to them, is worth all their life, and it does not matter. You know, Smotrich yesterday, he was actually speaking about, there was an interview, and this person that was interviewing him and said, you know, do you have a plan of which settlement and what settlement you're going to be building in northern Gaza? He said, yeah, you know, this is not a joke, but I actually went to different businessmen in America, and we're actually starting right now we're starting to set the plans of those that would like to start buying real estates and all of those ideas. ideas are already set. We're just right now in the early stage. We're demolishing everything, cleaning everything up, which basically is cleansing. Okay, basically ethnic cleansing, and we're cleaning everything up. And once we clean everything up, then it's going to be a lot easier to build everything. Once we basically kill everybody, doesn't matter how many people are killed, doesn't matter how many homes are demolished, we're just demolishing everything to clean everything up, quote unquote. That's why they're right now, whether there's Hamas, that's not the issue. It's basically removing every single tower, every single home, every single building there, because we want to make sure that it's clean, quote unquote. It's everything is out away so we can rebuild, quote unquote. And that's what's happening. You would say that لِيَمْكُرُوا فِيهَا, their plots. Why? Because they had seen that that place contains natural gas, a very important resource that they would need for their interests. And of course, certainly a very beautiful shore that would be basically something that Israel would want to continue along with Haifa and Diafa. And that way we could basically create an area that would be just right for this Israel, this greater Israel, and certainly good for even those that would want to make money, because we've got natural gas right there, and we can control a lot of the resources that would control the economy. Does it matter? Human life? No. So now people are seeing that human life, justice, does not matter to them. What matters is their own wealth. What matters is their own money. What matters is basically their own agenda. لِيَمْكُرُوا فِيهَا وَمَا يَمْكُرُونَ إِلَّا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ وَمَا يَشْعُرُونَ. And the only thing that they would really plot is really against themselves, but they do not sense it. They don't recognize it. They won't recognize it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ. But here's a question. If you say وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ, so is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's makr also evil? The answer is no. The abd's makr is evil. The servant's makr, the servant's plot is evil. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plot is only in khair, is only in justice, is only in good. And this is extremely important to understand. So وَيَمْكُرُونَ, they would make al-makr, and al-makr contains usually an evil connotation. Makr contains an evil connotation, that it basically comes from the basis of the intention and the basis of intending to harm. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not intend to harm. So how do you say yamkurullah? Yamkurullah, to bring harm to those that had committed injustice, to bring harm to those that had committed basically all these different things against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it doesn't carry an evil connotation, but it carries within it justice. That it is plain justice. وَإِذَا جَاءَتْهُمْ آيَةٌ قَالُوا لَن نُؤْمِنَ حَتَّى نُؤْتَى مِثْلَ مَا أُوتِيَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. They said, we're not going to believe until we would get what the prophets of Allah had basically received. What did they want to say? They said, you know what? And of course, al-Qurtubi and other mufassirin, they say the context of this ayah, and the context of this ayah is that the disbelievers, the pagan Arab, they said, you know what? How come he's the one that was chosen as a prophet? Al-Mughira, al-Walid ibn al-Mughira said, well, you know what? I've got more money. I've got more children. I've got a better social status. Then therefore, since I have a better social status, I have the means of power, then I should be the one to be chosen based on the means of power and me having it. Then therefore, I should be the one that should be chosen and anointed to be the prophet because I have the resources of power anyways. In other words, I should be the one that should have the power to control and to define truth. Pay attention to this one. What does that mean? When you look at a lot of the cultural things around us, you say perhaps media, Hollywood, you see all these different mannerisms that are indoctrinating us through media, through social media. Social media, they're basically the ones to, let's say, use this tool, but they were the ones that were fed by the media, fed by Hollywood movies, fed that later, of course, we had even the so-called education system, which was really indoctrinated and hijacked by a lot of the different political systems. Pay attention to this one. Political systems indeed have been hijacked by certain ideologies. Ideologies, they would basically bring about a potential on ground to create some source of power. And then, of course, you cannot separate that from economy. You cannot separate that from the education system, which is basically determined by the political system. The political system influences and determines what is being taught, how it's being taught. And we, not long ago, of course, we had seen the LGBT and how it was shoved down the throats of the children and shoved down the throats of the masses in universities, on university campuses, and we had seen in schools, and we had seen children then were basically told that you are right now supposed to be just telling me how you feel about yourself to determine your gender, and it was just chaos. And then it wasn't just within America, but it was something that America then, by the Democratic lobbying and the liberal lobbying, it basically made it, no, this is supposed to be an international thing. So you started seeing the Western countries, then the Arabic countries, like, oh, we have to abide by that. Yeah, this is the new culture. This is anybody that doesn't agree, that doesn't comply with our new definition of what defines justice, what defines orientation, what defines right, what redefines ethics, what defines morality, then in that situation, we're going to consider you as anti-human rights, as one that is antagonist to justice, antagonist to humanity, antagonist to ethics, and therefore immoral. Therefore, you are going to be our place of target. And of course, we had seen how, whether the Democratic lobby or whether we're speaking about right now, the Republicans, at the end is that political power is using military power, is also using culture. There's a certain culture that they're trying to enforce and shove down the throats of right now internationally. So if we don't recognize those areas, how just like that he had thought, that is, Walid ibn al-Mughira thought, well, I should be the prophet here since I have the money and I have the social status and I have basically the acceptance, and people would accept my say because I had proven to be a successful person through money, through getting different privileges. Then since I am privileged and all of that, then I should be the one privileged to also be privileged by the Lord Almighty's to be anointed by him as well. And that's why he was saying, well, if we were the ones that were chosen, we would have accepted that. But him be chosen? No, we're not going to take that. So what did they do? That's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Allahu a'lamu haythu yaj'alu risalatahu. The Lord Almighty is letting them know that you don't determine upon Allah, but Allah determines upon you. He's the one that determines and decides where, how, and what the message says. You don't make the determination upon Allah. سَيُصِيبُ الَّذِينَ أَجْرَمُوا صَغَارٌ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. For those that had أجرموا. What is al-ijram? Al-ijram is crime. But what is crime? Crime is basically transgressing the limit. What limit? It's a certain paradigm. You go beyond that paradigm, you go beyond that limit. That's when you would basically be trying to oppose the matters that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had set as true. The second that you would oppose and put yourself in a position to consider that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not the center of truth and that you are the center of truth, that's when you had fallen in arrogance. This arrogance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises that there will be a punishment for it, that there would be saghar. What is saghar? Saghar comes from the root saghara. Saghara means to make something small. Okay, to make something small. When you say saghar, that means to humiliate, to make them humiliated, and therefore expose their arrogance by humiliating them and letting other people see that they are not worthy of honor. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had promised, سَيُصِيبُ الَّذِينَ أَجْرَمُوا صَغَارٌ. And we had seen how, for example, Gaddafi, who was always boasting about his power, boasting about his, and of course, extremely arrogant, how at the end Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let him be found basically hiding in some kind of a sewage tunnel, and then humiliated, and the people were slapping him left and right, and basically in the most humiliating way, and basically died under the shoes of people. Saghar. And the same thing. Ya Rabbi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let Netanyahu, Ya Rabbi, face the similar kind of humiliation. Allahumma ameen. And Smotrich, and the McVeer, and all of these, and all of those that would support him, and including Trump, and including all of those that would support Trump, and all of those Smotrich, and all of these different people. Allahumma ya Rabbi, just as they had been so arrogant and then committed all these genocides and committed all these atrocities, Ya Rabbi, let them be saghar. Ya Rabbi, let this prostate cancer that Netanyahu is going through, Ya Rabbi, let it fill each and every single cell in his body, and let him feel the pain in each and every single cell in his body, and Ya Rabbi, don't bring him to death until he feels the complete humiliation in each and every single cell in his body. Yes, that's a Palestinian making a dua. Yeah, that's how we make the dua. Yeah, it's a, yeah. Allahumma ameen. All right. La ilaha illallah. وَعَذَابٌ شَدِيدٌ بِمَا كَانُوا يَمْكُرُونَ. And for the Lord Almighty would give them عَذَابٌ شَدِيد. What is al-adhab shadid? Adhab is a torment. Shadid, painful. Well, shadid actually means strong. And بِمَا كَانُوا يَمْكُرُونَ, for what they had been plotting. But let's continue. We're going to get to one thing. فَمَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ أَن يَهْدِيَهُ يَشْرَحْ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ. Whoever the Lord Almighty wants to guide them or had willed to guide them. Wait a minute. So do I choose this or does he choose it for me? It's both. How is it both? وَالَّذِينَ اهْتَدَوْا زَادَهُمْ هُدًى. You seek guidance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you guidance. You seek it, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give it to you. You seek it. Remember, there is المشيئة الكونية and there's المشيئة التشريعية. There's a will that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in the whole universe, given you free will in nature, given you free will. You have it within your nature. But there's المشيئة التشريعية. And there's the mashi'a, or there's the will of legislation. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will for us? What does He want us to do? And that's, you choose. You choose the will of the Lord Almighty in determining that you want the right path. And the Lord Almighty will give you more of that path. You would have to find it. You would have to seek it. You would have to be the one that is recognizing the miracles, recognizing the truth, and it's there. It's not that it's somehow hidden. It's not hidden. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. It's inside of you. Do you see what's inside of you? Do you see how your body functions? Do you see the human anatomy? What does that look like? Do you see the universe? Do you see how everything is functioning? Certainly, that was not created in absurdity. That was not created by chance. That had a purpose, just as you recognize that there's a purpose to every side of it. You recognize in the smaller details that there's a purpose for each and every single detail. Then therefore, there's a purpose for the whole set of details, which is life. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever had willed that he would be guided, يشرح صدره للإسلام. He would basically make his heart open. What is the word شرح? The word شرح can actually mean to make something open, to expose. Could also mean شرح, to give details. So wait a minute. How do we put that within this context? يشرح صدره للإسلام. So their chest would be open, would be exposed, would be seeing the details of Islam, or what does this look like? So when you look at يشرح صدره للإسلام, it said صدره, their chest, would be open for Islam. Wait a minute, not the qalb. Why not the qalb? Because this is just the beginning. Once you go farther in your commitment, you will see al-hidayah penetrating your qalb. This is just the beginning. The beginning is that you will see, you'll see that your heart, your chest, because the word sadr means chest. Your chest was open, was capable of seeing the details, was capable of recognizing. It basically was exposed to seeing the truth in Islam. The chest was open. The chest was capable of recognizing the details. The details of what? The details of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent in and through al-wahy, through the revelation. And whoever He wills to misguide. Wait, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala misguides? Why is He misguiding? No, He doesn't misguide you. But if you had chosen the path of misguidance, the Lord Almighty had already set two paths. There's a path of guidance. You had chosen, if you had chosen to go and find that path, then you're going to find more and more doors open for you as more, the further and the more consistent, the more determined for you to continue walking that trail, you're going to be finding more and more details, more and more support, more and more empowerment to stay on that path. But if you had chosen to take the trail of misguidance from the very start, and you insisted that you don't want to leave and take the other path, but you insisted, well, the Lord Almighty had determined already that the path of misguidance is going to basically take you from one part of misguidance to another, and it's basically going to be a slippery slope. You had decided. It's not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you to take that path. The Lord Almighty had given you free will. But وَلَا يَرْضَى لِعِبَادِهِ الْكُفْرِ. But the Lord Almighty never wills, never accepts that anybody would take the path of misguidance, the path of delusion. Never would He accept that. But if the person decided to follow their whims, to follow the wrong interpretation, to follow the masses interpretation, to follow their insecurities, to follow all of those that basically would misguide him through, yes, this is going to bring you happiness, and let's maximize happiness, let's maximize desires, etc. Let's get into following our dunya interests. Yeah, you're going to get to the path of misguidance, and it's going to continue with you. It's going to continue along with you. The trail is going to continue along as farther as you go. You continue to walk that trail, it's going to continue with you until you find a dead end in hellfire. Nas'Allah al-afwa wal-afiyah. But what happens throughout all of this? He said, well, they would يَجْعَلْ صَدْرَهُ ضَيِّقًا حَرَجًا. Okay, a couple things to see here. Okay, we need to delete some of these things because we need to see something. Pay attention right here. We're trying to get to something. So it said, whoever, the opposite of al-hidayah is al-dalal. Hidayah, the opposite of it is dalal. In other words, this is guidance, this is misguidance or delusion. And here, this is talking about the same thing. This is talking about the sadr, so nothing changes. All right? Sadr is sadr. But there's one thing that is basically the opposite of one another. Let's look at it. Here, yashrah is the opposite of dayya. So what happens? When we said yashrah, we said, one, to expose something, to open something, to see details. Okay? See details, see more of things. Why? Because you expose it. So when we say sharah ad-dars, that would actually mean to give you details, to open it up, to unfold it, to basically make it clear, to bring scrutiny, etc. But al-dayyiq actually means narrow. Okay, what happens what is the implication of having a narrow sadr, a narrow chest? Number one is that a narrow chest, this is talking about, is this physically? Is this literally? Is this psychologically? Is this metaphorically? We're going to get there because it's all. We're going to see how it's all. Now, it said, يَجْعَلْ صَدْرَهُ ضَيِّقًا حَرَجًا. So when you say ضَيِّقًا حَرَجًا, you're talking about the complete opposite of what is sharh, or what happens to the believer. For the disbeliever, their hearts would be narrow, their vision would be narrow, and certainly their life, their hopes would be narrow. And that's where a lot of the different diagnoses, they would come in as, yes, this is basically going through depression and all of that, when what it is, it's a misdiagnosis because it's considered supposed to be ضيقا حرجا. It is actually within the classification of and a result of basically misguidance. In other words, it's a religious form of depression. It is what is called khuwa ruhi. What is that? It's the emptiness on the inside. You know, psychology went through different stages, and what are they really studying? Are they really studying human motives, human behavior, or helping the human basically reconcile and feel better? In other words, therapeutic. What are we actually studying in psychology? And you would see, of course, all these different studies trying to put in a classification, etc. But I would like to say that a lot of what is presented in psychology, many times, not always, okay, this is not trying to completely cancel out every good thing that probably the psychology studies had probably presented. But this is to say that we have to be really careful. المؤمن is كيس فطن. A believer is awake. A believer is a person that doesn't just take any interpretation or data because it was labeled as a study. A mu'min, before they would take any interpretation or data, they basically scan it with a believer scan. They scan it. A believer scan is through Quran and Sunnah. They scan it and say, let's go over the scan and put it under the Quran and Sunnah lens and the Quran and Sunnah scanner, because if it contradicts it, then this interpretation contains a lot of discrepancies and will contain a lot of fallacies without us realizing. We have to scan it first. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us right there that a disbeliever would basically have their chest ضيقا حرجا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us a certain symptom. This symptom, for the lack of faith, for the dalal that they would be living in, the Quran laid out the symptom and the Quran laid out the treatment. What is the symptom? Said we could say, number one, the symptom would be they would be living in, number one, dalal, misguidance. That's the first symptom. In other words, their behavior. You want to study their behavior. Their behavior is going to give you basically an amount of scrutiny, an area to basically study. Their behavior is living away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, you wouldn't be capable of knowing the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or whether this person is in dalal unless you know the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, unless you know al-wahy. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us know that there's no way to study human behavior unless you basically recognize what is truth about human behavior, what truth is, what justice is, what defines right, what defines wrong, because the human mind is directly related to human behavior. Human mind is directly related to your own psyche or your own, let's say, motive or what's inside your own nafs. It's directly related to it. So what you think and what you visualize and what you believe in regards to this world, your purpose, and why am I here, the existence, all of that, that's directly related to your psyche, to your belief, to your motive, to what choices you would make. And that's why Islam considers that when the person's behavior had gone wrong, then expect that they had based and centered their life on the wrong center. What center? If it's not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's the wrong center. Then you're going to expect basically the data gone wrong. If the reference it is the wrong reference, then the data is going to be following from the reference, then the data is going to be wrong, and then the interpretation is going to be wrong, and then following that is going to be the behavior, it's going to be the practice, it's going to be basically the practical life that a person would live. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us right there. يَجْعَلْ صَدَرَهُ ضَيِّقًا حَرَجًا. Symptom 2, they would be living ضَيِّقًا. They would feel that things are narrow. Whether we're speaking about, hey, we're going to do a blood pressure test. Does that mean every single person that might have blood pressure issues or diabetes, or probably just maybe even digestion issues, etc.? Does that mean that every single person that has these basically has wrong faith? Absolutely not. Just as not every single person that is vomiting or has a fever basically has, a particular disease. But that's one of those symptoms to let us know at least the illness, that there's an illness that exists. So one of the things that we would see as a rise in mental illness, one of the reasons to it is actually al-dalal that people are living in. Is al-dalal, is the misguidance that people are living in, is the delusion, is being distant away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's one of those reasons to why mental illness is on the rise. In other words, some of the classification of classifying some people as basically going through and needing, for example, treatment, etc., and that what they're trying to do is trying to substitute, instead of going to the religious institutions, or instead of going to, for example, Islam, they're trying to substitute it with the therapy, and trying to substitute it with opening more and more clinics to bring therapy and psychotherapy and all of these different things, when that was not the case before. We didn't see people going through these kind of mental illnesses before. What is the rise for? The rise when people used to have, whether the khutbat al-Jumu'ah, or whether the Quran, or whether their dhikr, that was there to give them the spiritual support, to give them basically the backup, to give them this sense of security, to give them the sense of faith, to give them the sense of hope, to give them, the list goes on and on. They didn't need all these clinics to open up. But once they convinced the masses that these people of religious figures, that they're nothing but people that speak of myth, so they had to basically bring in an alternative to the increase in mental illness. So that's why you would sit with a psychotherapist, or you would sit with a therapist, and what they're really trying to do is trying to boost your hopes, trying to boost your personality, trying to boost your feelings, trying to get you out of trauma, trying to redirect your vision from looking at trauma to looking at hope, to from trying to look at the past to looking at the future, from trying to all of that. That's what the religion of Islam basically does in tazkiyah. That's what Islam is teaching us to do in tazkiyah. It was all along trying to redirect your vision. It tells you, I want you to look at the akhirah. I don't look at the dunya. I want you to focus on the akhirah. You're going through pain. I want you to focus on shifa. I want you to make this dua. You're going through probably maybe an abusive person. Oh, remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You basically remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the one that you would depend on. You went through perhaps maybe a hard situation in your life. You remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. سيجعل الله بعد عسر يسرا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make an ease after every hardship. So what do? You basically let your center be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, that person that doesn't have their faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is the symptom that they're going to be going through? The symptom is they're going to feel the narrowness within their body. And it would be haraj. It would be just feeling like it is pressuring on their chest so hard. But this isn't just a psychological thing, but it will affect them even physically. So medically, this person, maybe we had seen it. We know it already happens. In fact, it even happened with Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَبِيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ فَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ. Wait a minute, now you're contradicting yourself. I thought you said faith helps the person grow and not affect them. So how come you are contradicting yourself right now and you're saying that Prophet Yaqub, I mean, it's not like he didn't have faith. He had all the faith. But then you are saying right now that إِبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ, that his eyes turned white from the deep sorrow on his child in missing his child Yusuf. And then he turned blind as a result of that. Certainly. It's not contradicting myself. Let me break it down. Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, he used to say, فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ وَاللَّهُ الْمُسْتَعَانُ. He used to say every single time he was remembering his child, he would say, فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ. I'm just going to have beautiful patience. Why do you say beautiful patience? Why not just patience? Why beautiful patience? Because there are different levels when you go through trauma or when you go through any hardship. You can get into the level of probably, well, there's nothing that I could do, and basically cry and cry and cry. Or you can attempt to retaliate. I'm going to attempt to retaliate. This person harmed me. I'm going to harm them back. I'm going to let them taste the same pain, the same bitterness that I had went through. That's the second stage. The third stage is different. No, I don't want anybody to taste the bitterness of what I'm going through. I want it to be beautiful. I don't want anybody to go through the pain, not even my enemies. I will make, and especially that those are his children. I don't want my children to be in any harm because of what they had done. So I'll just say, فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ. I'll just have this beautiful patience and have my trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by saying, وَاللَّهُ الْمُسْتَعَانُ. And I will connect and depend on Allah Almighty. I will connect and depend on Allah Almighty to help me overcome the trauma, to help me overcome the pain, and to help me find my son. That's what Prophet Yaqub was saying. But although he was saying that and practicing that all along, but his body was showing signs and symptoms that although his behavior was practicing, let's say, trauma containment, but his body was not practicing that. You cannot control your body and what symptoms it shows. I can't control if my blood pressure readings are showing high blood pressure. I can't say, I want you to go down. No, I don't like these numbers, bring them down, don't bring them down. It doesn't work like that. I cannot control whether sugar level and how it may affect my eyesight, or whether it's probably my blood pressure, cholesterol, digestion, and what happens there. I cannot control that. But we do know that when we look at depression, we look at sadness, that certainly it does bring in a higher chance of sugar issues or diabetes, or perhaps blood pressure, or even cancers, and the list goes on and on. Studies actually tell us that right now, all right? But when Prophet Yaqub, alayhi salam, went through the symptom of losing his sight, that was to tell us that in terms of behavior, he did an outstanding job in maintaining his anger, in maintaining his emotions, in maintaining how he would behave in terms of this trauma. But his body was not showing the best signs in containing all of this. This is natural. This is regardless of you, whether it's a prophet, just like Prophet Yaqub, or whether you're a believer, or whether you're a highest level of iman, Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and inna al-ayna la tadma, wa inna al-qalba la yahzan, wa inna ala firaqika ya Ibrahim mahzun. Our eyes tear and our hearts would feel sorrow, and we're very saddened by your loss, Ibrahim. That was Muhammad ibn Abdullah. Now, there's a difference between natural traumas. We're talking about natural disasters, natural things that might happen, okay? Those things, and are we capable? Are we capable of overcoming this trauma? Islam comes in to give us this support. Islam comes in to give us the support to tell us, I want you to redirect your vision. And remember, not this dunya. I don't want you to look down, but I want you to look up. I want you to see your Lord Almighty. And we know that studies are saying when a person looks down, it basically affects their sense of feeling down and affects basically their depression, etc. So Islam tells you, I want you to look up. Instead of looking at the past, Islam tells you, I want you to look at the future. Instead of looking at yourself, Islam tells you, I don't want you to look at yourself as the center, but I want you to look at Allah as the center. I don't want you to look at your weaknesses as your place of power, but I want you to see Allah as your place of power. I don't want you to see that you are making the choices that, you know, in the Western psychology, it's always telling you that it's okay, you're doing just fine. It's trying to comfort you in whatever choices that you make. In whatever choices that you make. But that's not all schools in psychology, by the way. That's not all schools in psychology, but that was one path of the Freudian psychology that considered that we're going to be considering that there is no truth and that people's definition of truth, it can vary, but since there is, of course, Freud considered the death of God. So then since there is no God, there is no definition of truth, then you would have your definition of truth. And as long as our duty is to comfort you with your definition. But that's not all the schools, because other schools would basically say, no, there's supposed to be a standard and we're supposed to motivate, our job is supposed to motivate the person to basically change their behavior, to live up to the standard, to live up to what brings them into a level of stability and a mizan, a level of stability, a level of comfort can only come when you fulfill your behavior to live up to the standard and to live up to the principle. And when you basically boost your inside to recognize that I have a responsibility to basically you go and elevate my standards and not expect the standards to go down to my standards. The standards will not change. The standard of haqq is going to be a standard of haqq. your responsibility is to match, is to go up to that standard. The Freudian school will tell you, no, you don't have to do that. The feeling of guilt is painful. Let's not make them feel the guilt. Let's comfort them with whatever they're living in. That's our duty. But Islam says, no, wait a minute. You cannot comfort every single person, even when they go wrong, because you're contradicting right there the paradigms, the patterns, the system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within their nature and within nature that surrounds them and within the purpose that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created that preceded life. Now, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَجْعَلْ صَدْرَهُ ضَيِّقًا حَرَجًا. If they are living in dalal, they're living in a life of misguidance. They're living a life where they're basically thinking that the truth is going to go to their level and their standard, and that we're supposed to bend truth to meet their standards. Then what they're going to end up with is that they're going to be living in their own delusion. And the symptom you will see, ضيقا حرجا. They would be feeling that narrowness, feeling that tightness, feeling that confusion. Confusion? How did you get to the confusion? Well, the confusion actually comes from being confused about what decisions in life to make, how to understand life, how to understand the hereafter, how to understand my purpose. What am I here for? So definitely, once they get into that ضيقا حرجا, as كأنما يصعد في السماء, as if they are going upper and high, up in the sky. كذلك يجعل الله الرجس على الذين لا يؤمنون. That is how the Lord Almighty will make a rijs. When you look at the book of Tafseer, it will tell you, is it shaitan? Is it behavior? So is it literal or is it metaphorical? If it's literal, then we're speaking about contaminants. We're talking about contaminants, just different contaminants. But definitely, it's not necessarily literal, because if you were to look at behaviors, in other ayat, it described even behavior as also containing rijs. What does rijs literally mean? Rijs means contaminant. Rijs is an impurity. Impurity and a contaminant. Okay, if you were to say contaminant and impurity, then what does that have to do with a ضيقا حرجا as a symptom? Because whatever you put on your body, whatever environment you live surrounding yourself with, it basically starts affecting the inside. Whether you're talking about temperature, you're talking about chemical, you're talking about environment in terms of people, all of that will synchronize, and all of that will actually affect how your heart, how your brain, how your ruh is going to be functioning. That's why when we look at tazkiyah, tazkiyah actually means to purify. So when you look at tazkiyah, it means to remove a rijs. Tazkiyah means to remove a rijs. So if it means to remove a rijs, what does that mean? A rijs in tazkiyah is telling you and is giving you the training on how to correct, one, your vision, mind, that is. Two, your behavior, external behavior. Three, internal behavior. Three things. Let's also break it down. When we're talking about mind, we're talking about aqidah. Two, when we're speaking about external behaviors, we're talking about basically halal, haram. We're talking about what you do in all your senses, how you bring in information, and how you basically process that information. What you're going to be looking at is a form of information that you are injecting in your brain, that your brain will basically process in your heart as well, that your heart will then also pass it along to your ruh. What you're listening to is basically going to do the same thing. What you put on your body, that's why Islam considers that no, in order for you to basically prepare yourself for wudu, I want you to clean your body. What does cleaning the body have to do with anything? It's like the ruh is inside. But Islam is telling you that what your skin is touching, it basically penetrates inside of your body. It basically insides into your body. It basically affects your heart. It affects your deen. Where did we get that from? يا أيها المدثر قم فأنذر وربك فكبر وثيابك فطهر والرجز فهجر. Here's a rujz. There's a rujz and a rujz right there. والرجز فهجر. Said, يا أيها المدثر, the one that is all bundled up in that blanket. قم فأنذر. You've got a mission. ربك فكبر. You gotta have your foundation in place. ربك فكبر, your Lord Almighty should be your center. ثيابك فطهر, your garments, this is the place that you're in. ثيابك فطهر والرجز فهجر, and stay away from all the different contaminants. What contaminant? Are we just talking about contaminant like a physical contaminant? No. And then he said, ولا تمنن تستكثر. ولا تمنن تستكثر. What is ولا تمنن? المن is when you're bragging about something. تستكثر is you're trying to get something. So what do? It's a form of gaslighting. It's a form of a narcissist behavior that you're somehow wanting people to think that you are the center of any good thing that they are living, because you want to somehow let people worship you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَلَا تَمْنُن تَسْتَكْثِرْ, that وَالرُّجْزَ فَهْجُرْ, stay away from the different wrong behaviors, from the different contaminants, whether physical or whether moral, all of those different things. The misguidance is basically a contaminant. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching him that, no, I want you to stay away from any type of a contaminant, whether that contaminant was physical or whether that contaminant was behavioral. Why? Because it will affect your mental. It will affect your heart. It will affect your spiritual. They're all correlated with one another. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is laying out right in this ayah, telling us that there are a number of different reasons to why some might actually feel this symptom. One is behavioral, two is basically physical, and may also include behavioral, and that would also be of something that is related to basically what is on the inside. It's basically related to Iman. Now, this ayah actually comes with a set of different ayat that came before it. Let's look at the ayat that came before it. It was laying out a foundation. What is that foundation? In order for you to be mentally stable, you first have to have your foundation of knowledge, of basically your epistemology, your resource in place. And that's what these ayat were basically letting us know. He was letting us know that how you find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the world around you, and how you do not submit to the social pressure in letting you think a certain way. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us basically see, including, of course, the different psychology of the different areas of psychology for a disbeliever compared to the believer. For a believer, the psychology of a believer is that, what are they living in? A mu'min is basically living in a state of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inference is living in a state of freedom. If you're submitting to Allah, that means you are free from worshiping people, versus a disbeliever is basically coming in with a psychology where they're just seeking empowerment and seeking some form of dictatorship. In fact, the ayah goes farther and considers that they actually want to go as far as bending the truth to meet their standards, because they don't want to submit to the truth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us all of how they would want to put in, they would want to swear, if only things were actually coming our way, and they would get into all these different things and trying to think that, if you do it our way, we'll submit to you. What they're actually seeking is a form of gaslighting you. What they're trying to seek is a form of control. They want to control the truth and not submit to the truth. And at the same time, they want to control the believers as well. This is extremely important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us that it's extremely important to recognize that they will use all their power to attempt to control you. They will use all their power in an attempt to basically make you submit to their desires, because what they're seeking is a form of control, and what they're seeking is basically a way to bend the truth, and they want to be the ones in power in order to basically meet their own interest, to get to their own interest. Well, this right now, I guess Gaza exposed a lot of this, and right now we see a lot of this and how it's basically there. So in ayah 111, well, let's go to ayah 111. You would see right there in this ayah, وَلَوْ أَنَّنَا نَزَّلْنَا إِلَيْهِمُ الْمَلَائِكَةَ وَكَلَّمَهُمُ الْمَوْتَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if we sent down the angels, they would still not accept. Why? Because a mu'min sees through his insight, but a kafir basically lives in a form of a fake confidence. They would fake their confidence. They would fake their appearance to make you think that they basically have the power. They want to make you believe that they have the control. That's the same game that Netanyahu is playing. You know what? You see those phones? We control those. You see the land? We're going to control everything. You see, yeah, we control America. Yeah, we control this, because they want you to feel empty of any confidence in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make you submit to them. It's not militarily, but this is the same, even when it comes to epistemology, even when it comes to Iman, and even as an individual. Wallahi, they would be living in the most fear. I remember walking in Al-Quds. Wallahi, I would be walking in Al-Quds, and they would be just having a man probably pass by and speak with power, anything like that. Wallahi, they would be trembling with fear. They would speak with power at times, but wallahi, inside of them is nothing but fear. Nothing but fear. It's all just a fake. Just a fake image, a fake facade that they would put on themselves, that they are basically in power, but in reality, they're living in lack of confidence on the inside. This isn't just talking about, of course, Israel, but this is actually talking about the disbeliever himself. In the other part, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that a believer lives in feeling that freedom. They would feel that they're living the freedom. Why? Because they're not submitting to the people, but they're actually submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Versus the disbelievers, they're basically just living in this type of pressure where they are living in a form of a herd mindset. They're living the herd mindset, and they would continue to live it because they lack the confidence. They would live the herd mindset, and they're waiting for others to endorse their decisions, to endorse what they're doing, because they recognize deep on the inside that there's something wrong. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us know that a believer lives with a heart that is alive. How does a believer live with a heart that is alive? Because a believer lives, وَتَمَّتْ كَلِمَةُ رَبِّكَ صِدْقًا وَعَدْلًا. They would live because they would be in this comfort. They would be in this tranquility because they recognize that the words of the Lord Almighty had come in with truth, and they had come in with justice. Versus the disbelievers would put in all the effort in order to misguide you, in order to basically somehow let you live in this form of self-delusion. So a believer would basically live that level of يجعل صدره for a believer. For the believer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the believer would be يشرح صدره للإسلام. His heart would be basically living in that comfort. Will feel that openness, will feel that comfort. يشرح صدره للإسلام. Versus a disbeliever, they would be living in ضيقا حرجا, and they would want to convince you that they're actually comfortable. But the truth of the matter, you will see that contrast. For the attitude, the Muslim's attitude towards guidance is completely different than the attitude that a disbeliever will basically have. For the disbeliever is looking for control and arrogance. And then a believer is basically recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that basically delivers guidance, and I would submit myself to him. For the believer, because they're submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's why their response to recognizing the signs are completely different. It's not just recognizing the signs, but even the response in moments of test. A believer, even that moment of test, they'll be فصبر جميل والله المستعان. I'm not going to consider this is the end of life. There's akhirah. That's why you would say a believer is a courageous one. They don't fear death because they know that this is just a transition. A believer is a person of courage. A believer recognizes that there's no way to have akhlaq unless you recognize justice, unless you live the patience, unless you reject all attempts to give up on your principles. And finally, they would live the courage. Why? Because they recognize the signs of the powers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they would recognize how to live the principles despite all the tests. That's why you would see a disbeliever. They would live in self-deception. They would fear losing their social status. They would do whatever it takes, even if it takes eliminating and committing genocides. They would fear losing their social status. So what would they do? They would do whatever it takes. They know no justice. They know no standard. They know no level of principle, because their principles, they would be willing to change it all the time. And the masses, they would be considering the masses are their place of truth. For a mu'min is different. They're anchored in revelation, not social pressure, because they find that inner freedom is in obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not the crowd. That's why they would gain that empowerment. That's why they would gain that courage, because they recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is their place of victory, not the people. Versus the disbeliever. They're living in a herd psychology because they would follow that the majority is basically their place of truth, and they fear isolation and not conviction. Their soul is basically weak in that situation. Then, of course, a sense of responsibility. When you have your recognition of truth and place, and you recognize that you fear Allah and not the people, that's why a believer is courageous, because their sense of responsibility is guided by living the conscience, living basically the religious integrity. They avoid sin, whether in public or in private. They don't submit because in fear of people, but they submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because they fear Allah Almighty. So you will see that they would have that religious integrity in public and also in private. Why? Because they feel that they're accountable. And versus a disbeliever is living in self-justification. They just live to just practice self-justification. They let their arrogance basically, and of course they would be scheming us, and it's all, they would put it as if disguised in wisdom, disguised in study, disguised, but deep on the inside, they would know that it's basically not containing all the truth. That's why they would live the anxiety, because they would recognize that they would not live in this this relationship or in congruence with what they would find in the world. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that a believer lives the expansion of the heart, the calmness, the serenity, the psychological ease, versus the disbeliever is living in a form of an inner suffocation, tension, and they would basically end living in a form of denial and self-deception, herd following, hidden anxiety, and of course, psychological constriction, versus a believer, tranquility, openness. They're humble. They've got the moral responsibility, the inner balance, religious integrity. They're free from the herd pressure because they recognize that it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is my focus. And that's why a believer, they would acknowledge that guidance comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they would recognize that all I need to build is my trust in Allah. All I need to do is be humble to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All I need to do is recognize, basically, recognize all the different tools that the disbelievers might use against us. Therefore, a Muslim recognizes that the biases, the fears, the self-deception that the disbelievers are using, that does not delude me. That's not going to somehow get me off the right track, because I recognize that that's one tactic that they would be using. So you would basically, for a believer, they would avoid the blind conformity. They would avoid all of that because they recognize that social pressure is never going to make them submit to their standards, but they would recognize that it's having the inner conviction to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A mu'min develops a moral compass and a responsibility towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because they recognize with their that religious integrity, they would recognize that I am supposed to align with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's values, and don't expect that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's values are going to align with my expectations and my standards. So therefore, they would find that recognition, and they would find the meaning of their life in being coherent with what they would find in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. So therefore, they would recognize that there's the level of stability and feeling basically not guilty because they're living on the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore, eventually, they will basically feel that the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that level of spirituality that they will be living in, is what will give them the comfort. That's basically just in short of all the different things that we were talking about before. وَهَذَا صِرَاطُ رَبِّكَ مُسْتَقِيمًا. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in conclusion to this portion of it. And this is the path, that is the guided path, that is the straight path to your Lord Almighty. قَدْ فَصَّلْنَا الْآيَاتِ. We had given you all the details for people to لِقَوْمِ يَذَّكَّرُونَ, the people that would live in 1, remembrance, 2, in remembrance, whether in oral reminder, oral remembrance, or whether it's behavioral dhikr, or whether it's visual dhikr. Those are the people, لَهُمْ دَارُ السَّلَامِ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ. Those are the people that would have the house or the residence of a salam on Judgment Day. That is basically Jannah. Why Darus Salam? Because it's the house of peace. You live peace in this dunya, you get peace in the akhirah. Why عند ربهم? Because there's no other salam. There's no other place of peace but near your Lord Almighty. Near your Lord Almighty. In order to live in peace, you need to be near your Lord Almighty. If you are far from your Lord Almighty, you would never get to find that peace, for the Lord Almighty is waliyuhum. He's the one to give them authority. He's the one to give them guidance. He's the one to give them basically the stability, and all their actions, they would do it for the sake of their Lord Almighty, to give them that comfort. This is the end for today, and I hope I managed to give at least, let's say, the psychological side for the tafsir for the surah. Tomorrow, inshallah, we're going to be talking about Tafseer al-Qurtubi and what it has to say in regards to these ayat.
Tomorrow,
go ahead, dear.
Tomorrow fiqh, not tafsir, right?
Is it? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Tomorrow,
So tomorrow's fiqh of marriage. Okay. So, are you sure?
Yeah, Friday, right?
Okay. All right. If you say so. So I guess tomorrow we'll be doing fiqh of marriage.
On Monday, tafsir.
Monday tafsir. All right. All right. So
Monday fiqh, inshallah.
All right. Inshallah. So this is basically, let's say here she said, المصيبة عند المؤمن تقربه من ربه. Okay. إذ قال بموته لا نقول إلا ما يرضي لا نقول ما يرضي. Okay. I mean, that's absolutely
like a comment on ayah 100.
Right. Absolutely. So a believer basically sees a calamity as something that would get them closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just like in the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, عَجَبًا لِأَمْرِ الْمُؤْمِنِ إِنَّ أَمْرَهُ كُلَّهُ لَهُ خَيْرٌ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُ سَرَّاءَ شَكَرَ فَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُ وَإِنْ أَصَابَتْهُ ضَرَّاءَ صَبَرَ فَكَانَ خَيْرًا لَهُ. Right? That's a believer.
Sheikha Aisha, may I ask? I'm so sorry. Tomorrow you said we have fiqh of marriage, and
Right.
so will the classes start, or is it a question and answer again?
No, the classes are going to officially start.
Oh, I get it.
Are you sure it's tomorrow, though? I'll ask Noura and I'll see the website. Believe it or not, I don't know myself.
Friday and Sunday.
Is it tomorrow?
You may.
Oh, let's go to the website, right? Go to the website. I don't know what Noura put. Hold on.
Usually you make it on
tomorrow.
And Sheikha Aisha, I'm taking those classes in Jannah Institute, fiqh of marriage and divorce, so it will be the same content, right? I don't need to retake, or will it be different?
It's going to be different, dear. It's going to be different. You mean that was I the one that taught fiqh of marriage in Jannah Institute?
Can you repeat that? I couldn't get what you said.
Did you take the fiqh of marriage with me in Jannah Institute?
No, it's year 2, so I just started year 2. We're going to take it this year.
I teach things differently. It's up to you, but I teach things differently.
So you're not taking you're taking the tafsir classes only? I thought you're teaching us the fiqh as well. I just joined this week. to General Institute, so I'm not sure
Fiqh of
who's
marriage, they
teaching.
didn't ask me to, I don't remember that they told me then, or asked me to teach fiqh of marriage this year.
Hmm,
No,
I
I'm
get
not.
it. So it will be different.
It will be different. I teach fiqh of marriage differently.
It's Sheikha Zehra Hazraji.
Okay, yeah, then that's different. Yeah, I teach things differently.
I get it. Jazakallah
All right.
khair.
You can join both. I don't mind. All right.
Jazakallah
So
khair.
according to what Noura had put, wait a minute, Noura, you didn't put it. Where is it? Fiqh of marriage, September 22nd. This is what she put. Let me show you. Right there. Okay. Right there. Fiqh of marriage, September 22nd. So that's not tomorrow. And that's going to be 2 days from now.
Is it the same podcast? You start like this?
I mean, the same timing, you mean?
Last week, the podcast